There are apologies from the mana whenua who from time to time are able to help us open these meetings, but not today. And we've got an interpreter because the proceedings are going to be filmed, and that's about all there is for opening remarks. I'm going to talk for, so long as you don't interrupt me too much, it's sort of up to you, but probably it's best to let me gabble through a bunch of slides for about 15 minutes or something like that. And it's really just to introduce this, that or the other aspect of the new hospital build because it's a complicated old business. And then we will be able to get into question and answer pretty quickly. So let me see if I can get this thing to work. The people that you can see on the screen are more or less here. And they know what they're talking about and I don't. But I'll do the talking initially anyway. We've got clinicians, people who understand construction, people who understand management, planning. So meet them and you'll get to see them, plenty of them, as the evening goes on. They're straightforward people. That probably leads me to just make the remark that they are entitled to our respect and they'll get it, I know. But also we're entitled to be respectful of one another because there's often different things that matter to different people, and so we need to give people time to get all the bits and pieces that are going to be aired. That's pretty much what I've just told you, so let me flick on to the next slide. See if you can remember that. It's a really, really good website. It must be nearly 100 stories up there by now on bits and pieces of the goings on in this hospital. It's managed by Suzanne, who's standing up there looking like she'd rather not be pointed out. And for those of you who are looking for some detail, that's where to go. It's a really good site and it's updated. I think about another 3 stories went up today. Here's just an early slide to tell you that it's $1.6 million or thereabouts for the moment. That the outpatient building is rather obviously underway because you can see it, and that the inpatient building, which is a great deal bigger, is nearing the end of its design. Here's some fine-sounding words about our hospital, but please don't be cynical. They are well chosen and they drive a lot of thinking. And we'll get into the detail of that a little as we go through. Here's some numbers, and numbers always take a bit of time to digest, so I'll leave it up a wee while. It's to give you an idea of how the existing hospital compares with the new hospital. It's not to say that bigger is better or more is better, but very often it is. And in this case, everything's quite a lot bigger. What we've eliminated, but we're happy to take you through it should you ever want to be interested, is what the cuts of a year or a bit over a year ago look like. We've taken them out because it is really quite confusing, but if you want us to tell you what they look like, we're happy to go through it again. We think most people already know roughly what's going on, and the essence of it is that the so-called cuts are really minor, the clinical cuts. There's a lot of cuts or efficiencies in the way the thing's being built, but the clinical cuts as such are pretty modest, in fact very modest. There's some project design principles which Did you want me to go back, sir?
Just for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Wouldn't mind.
No trouble.
Okay.
Okay. These are also fine-sounding words, but they influence the architects, especially the health planners, the engineers, a great deal. And I'm going to introduce them to you rather than dwell on them or draw them out. Feel free to draw them out in questions and comment time. But I'm just going to keep moving because I've got to introduce another concept to you, which is this. The broader outcomes is the idea that if someone's going to spend north of $1 billion in your city for a building, what more can we get for that sort of capital injection? What more can we get than a building? What can we do about developing a construction workforce? What can we do about taking a different approach to land transport? Should we change the way that this city teaches health sciences? What do we do to see if we can't reduce the recidivism rate from people who are learning behind the wire, the beginning of some apprenticeship or skills? How do we involve more women in the construction industry? And on, excuse me, on and on it goes. So broader outcomes are the things other than the building itself and the things that can be left permanently in our society, just in the way people think or in the way that they have their skill set enhanced. There's a whole bunch of jobs when you build a hospital, so it's not just welders and carpenters and electricians. The list of jobs, that's not meant to be read, it's meant to impress you as being a list of a great deal of things. And it's just a little reminder that there is something here for everyone. It's both buildings are very complicated. The big one, the inpatients building, is especially complicated. Perhaps, certainly the most complicated building in Dunedin. And the other way of looking at jobs is who works in the hospital, not who builds it. And again, you can go looking for doctors and nurses, because we always do, but look at the other many skill set, bits of skills that are needed and the professional training that goes with that. And that needs to be thought through too, because if you've got a hospital that's used to, is looking to doing things differently, then, and we'll come to that too, then we need to be sure that we've got the skill set to do it. Now, a bit of a look at the little building, the one that you can see popping up. It's got, there's a couple of photographs, one from this month and one from 3 months ago. I won't read out what's there, you can see for yourself. I've got some other shots and some other bits of information. Look at the length of the piles that's on reclaimed land. And those words down the bottom left-hand corner, there's a story behind each of them. Again, I won't go into detail. Feel free to question it. Here's this other side, Castle Street side. The Castle Street, St Andrew Street corner is the wall that makes that corner has just gone up, and you can see where it begins and ends. It's a beautiful building. Here's what it looks like, or something like what it looks like when you walk into it. It's pretty obviously a building that's a New Zealand hospital, isn't it? You wouldn't find a building with those that looks like that, with that carving, for example, in Birmingham or Sydney or someplace. And now let me introduce another idea, and that's the idea of this building causing a change in the way that we deliver services to the public. And all of those changes have been going on, whether you build an outpatients building or not, but the outpatients building catalyses them, advances them, accelerates them, or is an opportunity to do all those. So a wee bit more on that now. Again, quite a bit of writing, but I'm going to keep moving so you can get to question time or comments. The Clinical Transformation Group is represented here, and they provide a thing called clinical governance, and that means that whatever we do, whatever new ideas people come up with, it has to be clinically functional and safe and appropriate, defensible. There's some other words there about integration and having things streamlined, and about getting the community involved. And I'm thinking that in the course of the evening, probably Bridget will take that forward a little bit, so that you all feel invited to see whether you want yourself to be considered for involvement. And then we've got 2 slides about digital things. This will be New Zealand's most digital hospital. And so there's a slide to try and give you a feel for what that means from a patient's perspective. And then there's another slide to try and give you some idea about how that would feel from a person working as a clinician. And I won't go on about all that. You can sense that it's going to be a significant change and a significant improvement in efficiency. I will say that we're going to be paper light, not paper less. So not all of us are going to be digitally competent. Some people of my age or even older may not be so. And so we're not being too dogmatic about this. We're making a big change, slightly less than a complete change. And then there's something else to explain, which is that if we're to change towards a more digital future, and if we're to change the models of care, and if we're to move from an old building to a new building, and we're to do things a little differently as we go, and we're to be thoughtful about what doesn't occur in the outpatients building at all, but occurs in the community. If we're to do all that, then we need a transition strategy. And so this slide is to tell you that that's underway. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner, the first purple box is here and now. And there are people here who can take you through more of that, should you be interested. It's a really important part of the whole process. And so even though we've only just got the steel up, work on how to have this thing tick over on day one has begun. Here's a little reminder that we're seeking some community involvement, and I'll just may want to take a note of the website on the bottom right-hand side of that slide. The fact that you express an interest doesn't mean that you'll be involved, but it means you'll be considered. We're putting together, why I say that is that we're putting together a group of ordinary people who are nonetheless diverse in their age and ethnicity or their life experiences or whatever. So we want people to put their hand up so we can choose a group of people who will be well representative of our community. Keep that in mind. Some pretty pictures about the inpatient building, and then that's me. The inpatient building is big. It's really big, and there continues to be a lot of misinformation about it. The best one I've heard recently was last week when I was sitting in an aircraft next to a woman who told me, I'll just repeat her story, that she was speaking with a doctor employed by Te Whatu Ora, who assured her that the inpatient building only went up 3 stories because it's being built on reclaimed land. Is it 10 or 11? I've forgotten. It's 11 stories. So you just get a bit of that, even from people who should know better. And that really is the reason that we're trying to give you a bit of a feel for this building, even though the design is not yet finished. I'll show you a couple more slides so you get a bit of a feel for it. Link across St Andrew Street, which is for clinicians and for patients who may, for example, need to move from one building to another building for some special radiographic undertaking or other. And now we move to question and answer. So you pop your question up, and then one of us will pop up, and if nobody does, you'll have me answering it. Never ideal. And we will repeat the question back to you, because this is being recorded and it's commonly watched afterwards. So a microphone's going to come your way, and thank you for waiting for it, sir, and give us your question and I'll probably repeat it.
Thanks, Peter, for all your hard work. I think the big concern for ratepayers and local residents in Dunedin is the provision for car parking for the new building. Could you amplify just what your present thinking is about providing adequate car parking for the new hospital?
Sure. Do I need to repeat that, Suzanne? I do, okay. So the question is, what about car parking and where are we going with that? There's a thing called a master site plan, which was finished a year or 2 ago, and which set out to show where a car park could go. And it's just north of the Central Fire Station area, roughly there. And then the question is, well, it could go there, will it go there? And the answer is that, actually, Hamish, do you want to pick it up or shall I keep going?
Just keep going.
Keep going, right. The answer is that the car park is not part of the scope of the hospital. So when we finish the hospital, we won't have built the car park, except that we probably need one. And so it will probably be built by a third party, the private sector. There's some talk about whether the Te Whatu Ora should underpin that development by saying that they would be cornerstone landlords or cornerstone owners or users of a couple of the 3 of the levels or something. There's of course no car park with the current hospital. There's never been a hospital car park in Dunedin, but we think that the time has come when it may not be a bad idea, and that's why it's been allowed for in the master site plan. I think I'm just trying to remember the stage that we're at. I think, Hamish, we've been into the market to get expressions of interest, or have we? Right, so we've been into the market to see if there's expressions of interest. The time taken to build a car park is relatively short. So it's not an urgent thing, but it is pretty important to continue to get it progressed so that people like you get a decent answer to your question.
Yes, my question is pretty simple, really. I think you've got a duty to the nurses and the young doctors who work there, from a safety point of view, to provide a car park, or at least organise it. For example, Christchurch have just built a new car park for their nurses, doctors, patients, etc. The new training hospital, the first in Australia in the last 20 years, that was part of the building project. They put a parking building up immediately adjacent to the new hospital, which was built in 3 years, not the enormous time it's taken to build this one.
All your remarks about Christchurch?
I think you've got a duty to plan that hospital car park, and at least Naitahu, for example, Naitahu property, they were very much involved in one in Christchurch. And I think you should be planning it now, not in 10 years' time.
We're not planning it in 10 years' time. The question is, the questioner, the comment was, I'm sorry, it wasn't a question, that you, presumably me or the health system or somebody, has got a duty of care to provide a car park for clinicians and actually also for people who are driving their elderly mothers down from Oamaru in a southerly. You know, there's a few other things to be considered other than clinicians. So we don't challenge any of that. We have been involved with Naitahu. They have expressed an interest. They are one of the players. Doesn't mean they'll get the job, but we're in the process of moving it forward. And we won't begin building it in 10 years' time. I'm just saying that it doesn't take anywhere near as long to build as a big hospital. You're shaking your head. If you were the owner of the car park and no one turned up and you went bust, then you would have a different point of view. So we've got to be mindful that this is a commercial thing, and our job is to facilitate it, which is what we're doing.
The one in Christchurch was a dual facilitation between the City Council and Naitahu and a couple of other people.
Yes.
And it was initiated by the hospital board.
That's right. And a similar thing's happening here. You've got two councillors sitting in front of you.
Yes, Dunedin and surrounding areas have an ageing population. Now, it concerns me when I hear things like streamline check, digital. Now, how are elderly people that know nothing about computers going to get on there?
Yeah. So the question was, if you move the health system to digital, how does that help someone who's elderly or maybe blind or maybe have some disabilities? How does that help them? I'm sorry I didn't go into much detail with that. I don't know whether Bridget wants to jump up and say anything, but remember that we're going paper light, not paperless, for precisely the reason you've raised.
Thank you. So to answer the question a couple of ways, the Digital Ready Hospital enables the staff working in the hospital to be able to get access to the clinical records at their fingertips of people and patients that are coming in to see them. So what that enables is a far more efficient time that they can spend with the patients and their families in front of them, because that information, rather than in big reams of paper, it's able to be searched and available at their fingertips on the computer. So that's one really good advantage. The other important point is you are correct. Not everyone is either comfortable or has availability of access to computers or smartphones. And so that means that we have considered that as part of our front of house model. So when people come to our new buildings, we are going to have a concierge model where we're going to have real life people that are going to be there actively looking for people that are needing help. So not sitting behind a desk and waiting for people to necessarily approach them. It's going to be looking and scanning people that are arriving in the building, a bit like what happens when you go to Air New Zealand. There's people there that are watching the people who maybe need a bit of extra help with all their luggage or all their kids or all of their whatever else happening, and be able to come up and actually check in with them at what help that they need. Now that could be help with finding their appointment, it could be access to interpretation services, it could be access to particular disability support. And so we really do acknowledge that the human interaction with our patients and their families is really, really important, but we do see that the digital opportunities will have an advantage as well. So it's not an all or nothing, it's a both.
Thank you.
There you go, Sue.
One of the buildings that was done away with that was initially put in the plan was the building sharing the university, Polytech and clinicians, future education. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. What is being done to actually provide that facility? Because it strikes me that medicine is an ongoing education. You can't do away or do without it. And I thought it was a very good facility to be included in there. And to lose it, I think lowers the status of the hospital itself.
Okay. Let me slightly rephrase your question. You can nod if you're in agreement with the way I've dealt with it, and shake your fist if you're not. There's a lot of, a great deal of health education in Dunedin, and there was a proposal for a thing called the Interprofessional Learning Centre, which was a three-way proposal with the Polytech, the university and the health system. And the master site plan shows that that's going to be placed just north of the little building, the outpatients building, so that it would have close access to the health system, but would be the building in which interprofessional education took place. I don't want to go too far down the track of what that is, because I might end up in a rabbit hole. The point is that that building is currently on hold. It's not being built there or anywhere else. And probably the key underlying reason is that the university, all three players have to be good with it, and the university's currently in a position where it can't say that they're good with anything, because they've walked into a bunch of fiscal difficulty, and they're downsizing their staff and so on. I don't want to speak for the university. I can't see any university senior in the audience, so I need to be mindful of that. But what I do think is that we will, in the next year or two, re-explore that when we know what the university's appetite for such a building is, and indeed whether Tipu Kinga, the Polytech, is still interested. But one last thing to say, and that is that from a hospital perspective, there's one of the roles of the Professional Learning Centre is to provide a site for ongoing training, upskilling of our clinicians. And indeed, clinicians, if someone's been a clinician for 10 or 20 years, they'll all tell you that you've got to go through an ongoing accreditation process, and that would happen in the Interprofessional Learning Centre. I think that you can't open a brand new hospital without having that facility. So I think that need will drive a fresh look at the Interprofessional Learning Centre when the university is a bit clearer about what its budgets are likely to be in out years. Do you want to say anything? I know you've been involved in all this. Do you want to add any comments? I know you're recently retired, but let me pull you out of retirement and see what happens.
Or place to speak, but interprofessional learning is a vitally important part of education for health professional students and also at postgraduate level. So in this day and age, there does need to be some facility for interprofessional learning and also for simulation. So they're a core part of education and ongoing professional education. And if you look around the world, there's some very exciting plans that are available, and it would be very sad if Dunedin missed out on something.
Thank you.
Good question, but when the inpatient and outpatient hospitals are finally built, and I guess you vacate the ward block, what is the fate of the ward block once it's no longer used for its current purpose?
Hamish doesn't want this one either.
We can talk to it.
Well, go on, come up, let's tell it. It's not a silly question.
It's not
we
a silly
get asked it all
question
the time.
at all. Look, the short answer is we don't know yet, and we're just kind of working through it. It's a significant building. It's a building of scale and size, and there are parties that might be interested in using it, but not all of it. And also it has some challenges which around, not so much around the structure, but around the facade in terms of how that's functioning. So we'd need to resolve those and then kind of think about what the future might be. Yeah. Excellent question that we're still working through.
Tell them one building's surely going to come down.
Look, I think most likely the clinical services building will come down. That will be very much end of life. So that's the building that kind of sparked all of the new Dunedin Hospital business case. But we just need to sort of establish the timing on that, and obviously demolition in a city site with other active buildings around it is complex. So, and that's all part of what we call a site master planning process. So where the infrastructure group will have a look at what future buildings we need, what other areas are out of scope, how we might build and shape the campus, and then tie that in with the development that the university is doing as well, just to make sure that we've got something that's very cohesive in the central part of Dunedin.
Thanks, Hamish.
Just to use no question for the first one, the 23-hour ward, is that going to be part of BD?
Patrick, do you want to do that? I'm trying to get our experts up here rather than just hearing
Well,
more
the
and
reason
more.
I ask is the fact that you've got, you're going from 31 to 53, it's a huge
It is
jump in
huge.
itself. And I'm a bit curious about whether that 20 is actually part of 53, or what staffing provisions you're going to have to bring in for ED. Because they're running flat tack now.
Do you want to do it, or you want me to do it?
I think I can give it a go.
Give it a go. Oh,
Bridget will correct me. I'm Patrick Manning, the Deputy Chair of the Clinical Transformation Group. It's a good question. The 23-hour ward is a new unit. It's not part of ED, it's a separate unit. It's mainly designed for people who would be coming in for a procedure that doesn't require them to be admitted and stay for any length of time in hospital. So it's a way of providing very efficient care for very short-term stay patients. One of the problems that you have in a hospital, and you hear about this and read about it in the newspaper all the time, is that the hospital gets full of sick people, and as a result, with acute patients, we have to delay or put off planned operations. Now, this is a way to mitigate that to a certain extent, because the 23-hour ward will not fill up with acute patients. It's always going to be available, so we won't be delaying or putting off those planned procedures. So it's a way of mitigating that. You're right that there's a significant increase in the size of the ED, and some of these services that will be provided are going to require increased staffing. We can't, we will have a state-of-the-art hospital, and what we now need is state-of-the-art services to use that hospital and to make the hospital function and get the most out of it. And that's what this transition process is all about, identifying what staff we need, where the gaps are, and how we fill them. So, does that answer your question? Shall I go?
Sorry. You've got going from 17 to 26 theatres. Is that inclusive of day surgery? You know, here you've got your day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You spoke about your master plan. Is the physio core part of your master plan?
No.
Why not?
Well, because the Cabinet said so.
Pardon?
Because Cabinet said so in July 2017. And a slightly more expanded answer is that the physio pool has not been part of the DHB as such for years. It's been owned and operated by a trust. To cut a long story short, the most useful thing the new hospital building did was to say we didn't need that part of the Fraser building area for the hospital, so we weren't going to stick a digger through it. That enabled the outgoing Southern District Health Board to say to the trust, you can have this long term if you want it. I know that because I was chairing the DHB at the time. So where they had uncertainty, we were able finally to give them certainty, but that didn't fix the pool. The pool is in a dilapidated state. And the trust, there's a petition going around, you probably are aware of it, to try and progress the future of the pool, there's some interaction with some of our engineers saying, can we fix it this way or that way, and what's the likely cost of having to replace this bit or that bit. So there is some involvement with Te Whatu Ora, what used to be the DHB, but it's not part of the hospital and it's not part of the health system. I forgot to repeat the question.
Has there been any progress made on finding a building or a site for the laboratory services?
Oh, good. Should we get you up, Bridget? Are you the best person? So the question is about pathology.
Kia ora. Good question. We might answer this in two ways. Just as a bit of a summary for the the timeline this year. So there was a decision made earlier in the year by the Minister at the time to initiate a review into the pathology services that were at that time proposed within the Dunedin Hospital, and that was a stat lab, so that was a unit that was about 350 square metres, and the Minister at the time asked us to do a investigation into the suitability of that size unit to deliver pathology services to the Dunedin Hospital. What I'll do is I'll hand over to Patrick in a wee minute, but what we did do is we got an independent health planning company called Distravis, and then we also engaged with local stakeholders, so that included clinical pathologists and med lab scientists, to look at what the options were for the most efficient and effective pathology service for the Dunedin Hospital and community. And so that review has been returned, but I might just hand over to Patrick because he can talk about it from the clinical sort of user stakeholder perspective.
Thanks, Bridget. The plan was to have a small stat lab, but clearly that would only provide some of the services, the acute services in the main hospital, and it would have to be supported by a much bigger standalone laboratory nearby. And what it became abundantly clear was that you were going to have to duplicate, both in the stat lab and in the standalone lab, a number of different services. And it just did not look as though, and you'd be duplicating staff and equipment, etc., to run two laboratories. So it didn't look cost effective at all. And so what's been decided, and this went through a peer review process by pathologists and clinical lab scientists here in New Zealand, who agreed that it didn't make sense to have a stat lab, so that has been omitted now from the plans, which is quite good because it has freed up some space. And the current thinking is that there will be a standalone laboratory close to both of the buildings. They will be linked. That building will be linked by pneumatic tubes, which is what's currently done, to get specimens from one building, from either building to the laboratory. Specimens will be sent by pneumatic tube where they will be processed. So this will be more cost effective, and now we're just working through the process of having to plan the process of getting this laboratory built on where it's going to go on the master site plan, and then the process of having to get it designed and built. We do have an interim option of the current laboratory, where it is right now, will be linked up by the pneumatic tubes, so that will act as an interim facility until we have a new state-of-the-art pathology building built, because we're not 100% certain that it would be able to be built by the time, especially the outpatient building is open. So that's the current plan with pathology.
Suzanne, could I ask you to wander over and see Raymond? And Raymond, can I ask you to introduce yourself and introduce your two staff members and give us a sentence or two, would you mind?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Raymond Clark. I'm the Operations Manager of Workforce Central Dunedin. Barry is back there. We're a job and skills hub, and we work together with the main contractors to look after and to some extent supply the workforce needed to build a hospital. And hopefully one day we'll become involved in the workforce needed in the hospital. I've got two colleagues businesses to contractors, small businesses to big ones, that we can have a legacy of small businesses having benefited from the massive build that is happening here. And when the building's built and everyone's gone home, we can have small businesses that have become big ones. Now that is Lloyd's role. Construction skills training would be all us. Sitting next to Lloyd is Jessica Hay. She's our marketing person and she looks after the office for us. She also does a whole lot of work for Business South, which is the main business collective. And she's got contacts with all businesses too, Business South membership. And our role would be to do all the things in those little boxes at the bottom, but to a lesser extent reducing emissions and waste. So we were job and skills hub. Technically speaking, a person should be able to walk off the street, knock on our door, and say, I need to work, and we get them a job on the site. That works when the jobs are available on the site.
Thank you, Raymond. That's great. And if anyone's got a granddaughter or a son-in-law who is thinking about a career or a career change or anything, be in touch, we can help. I've put this up in the hope that you might ask some more questions about the outpatients building, because there's a gentleman here who you haven't heard from yet and who doesn't like to do a lot of public speaking, but he is Te Whatu Ora's main man on the little building. So if you've got any questions you want to ask about its construction, feel free. That's me trying to embarrass him. So the question is how, the bit of steel that we can see at the moment, is that all, or is there going to be some more?
Thank you for the question, Patrick. We could have discussed this at the kitchen or something, but we're on centre line at the moment, so we've progressed from the east to the west. We're doing the final pieces adjacent to the fire station at the moment, and then that'll complete essentially 50% of the steel. So we're at full height, and we're at centre line with the west half to still come. So most of that will start in the new year. There'll be some this year, but it'll really start afresh again in the new year. Does that answer your question, Patrick? Any more questions on outpatients?
Can I just ask, the foundations for these buildings, are they floating foundation? The reason I ask that is because the old building that used to be there, big tall building with Cadbury's, was on a floating foundation. So if there was an earthquake, the building moved with the way the earthquake was. It wouldn't fall down.
All right.
Because it's on reclaimed land, then the chances are if you have an earthquake, you're going to have more problems.
All right. So I'm a registered civil engineer, and I think the question was, are the foundations correct? In broad speaking. So outpatients is described as an importance level 3 building, so it has to tolerate certain earthquakes and be serviceable in certain events, which is marginally less than the inpatient building, which is an importance level 4 or IL4 building. The actual physical piles are virtually the same on each of the building. They're all founded to, off the top of my head, it's about 1,000 tonnes per pile. I think I've got that number right. And currently we drive them down to a strata, and we've found that at about 19 metres on outpatients. The trials indicate that on inpatients they may be deeper on the southern end, but they go to resistance, not to depth. So we'll drive them and test them until we're satisfied. Outpatients has a series of shock absorbers, and I'll just go up to the picture and show you one. So as the building sways in an earthquake, it's a bit like the suspension on your car. The suspension on your car tends to take the initial hit and then slowly release it. And that's why the car doesn't go down the road like a jumping jack. and neither will the building. The building's slowed down. So that's good for occupation and transmission of forces. On the inpatient building, the whole foundation system is isolated by a big lead rubber plug, and you often hear about base isolated buildings. So inpatients gets the benefit because it's got to be more robust of having the lead rubber bearing incorporations, so it never experiences the forces of the earthquake. It experiences a percentage of the forces. So I don't know how that relates to the exact Cadbury model, but that's the modern engineering solution to those challenges. Does that answer your question? I'll hand it back to the clinical team.
So the question is, when are we going to get a PET scan or something like that?
Yes.
Okay. You want to do it, Patrick? You want me to? You want to do it?
Yeah, I don't know exactly when, but we have got the space fitted out, ready for a PET scanner. And I guess we should just keep our fingers crossed, because the National Party had it as one of their promises that they would fit it out with a PET scanner. You know, we'll try and hold them to that, and hopefully when the inpatient building is built, it will be built with a PET scanner in it.
Right, and just curiosity, how much does it cost?
How much does a PET scanner cost?
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head, but actually the cost is not huge, actually. They're not, I think they're almost equivalent to some of the other state-of-the-art scanning machines, like a state-of-the-art MRI scanner, I think. You know, have you got a figure?
2 to 3 million.
2 to 3 million.
Let me add a little bit more. There is endless confusion about PET scanning. There'll be the first PET scanner in Dunedin will open in a year or two. It will be a private sector PET scan. Every other PET scan in New Zealand, as we speak, is a private sector PET scan. The Dunedin PET scan, should it arrive this, at the time of the opening or soon after, will be the second PET scan for the Otago Southland region. At the moment, there is one region, Auckland Northland, which has 2 PET scans, and they are not being used to capacity. So there's a little bit of further information. I probably should add that if you do offer diagnoses, like anything, people will start using it. So just the fact that it's there will cause an increase in its use. Will that do? Bridget says that's enough for PET scanning. What else would you like to know about?
Peter, this is a purely apolitical question, if I may. In terms of the new incoming coalition government, is it your understanding that they will give you full support to build the hospital, inpatient and outpatient, on budget, on time, and with full operational facilities promised to the people of Dunedin and Otago Southland? In other words, you're not hearing any change in their perception or support to ongoing the new build?
No, and in the course of the campaign, as Patrick's just alluded, the National Party, one of only 3 parties in the government, but the biggest one obviously, said that they would reverse all the cuts that the Labour Party government made. There aren't really very many of them left, but there is a PET scan to be reversed if you want to get particular, and I've just given you further information about that. I think your question was, given the change of government and given that we're supposed to be in fiscally difficult times and everyone's taking their belt in by a notch or two, is this project at risk? And my answer is not to my knowledge. Raymond.
My question was going to be, the new outpatients are presumably bigger than whatever the service currently is. So where's the staff for the outpatients going to come from in
Okay.
2026?
Back to you, Bridget. So the question is, the new outpatients, including day surgery, is going to be bigger than the existing outpatients, including day surgery. Where are the staff coming from?
Thanks, Raymond. That's a very insightful question. We have spent quite a bit of time over the last year or two understanding the numbers of staff and the types of skills and expertise that we'll be needing to bring on board when we open the outpatient building. And so we've got really detailed spreadsheets that help us to understand how many different types of allied health staff, medical staff, nursing staff, cleaners, orderlies, security, back of house, linen people. We've got all the nuances of all the different types of workforces that we will need, and we have a pretty good understanding of when we'll need to bring them on, when we'll need to train them, and also what the investment is that we will need. And we're working with our leaders across Te Whatu Ora to work towards ensuring that we've got that investment ready to go so that we can start to recruit those staff.
Excuse me, just before you go. It seems to be a bit of deficit because at the moment we can't even maintain our cancer system. We're losing, is it accreditation for that at the moment?
So what I might do is just ask if Hamish wants to come and answer that question. Probably important to note that when we're talking about the outpatient building, we're talking about skill sets that are very expert, but they are from workforces that we are probably not in extreme short supply. Yes, we need to ensure that we work collectively across New Zealand, ensure that we're not taking workforces from other parts of the country to fill our need here in Southern. But day surgery and outpatient type activity are very typical types of workforces. I think maybe the question that you might be answering is asking about cancer in particular is far more sort of expert workforces that are maybe difficult to recruit across all of New Zealand and all of the world shortage. So I don't know if Hamish wants to.
So as everyone's probably aware, there's a global shortage in the health workforce, and that's spread across most, if not all, professions. So Te Whatu Ora nationally is doing a lot of work around ensuring that there's a pipeline, so working with training institutes, working with immigration just to ensure we've got a good flow of internationally trained workforce coming in. And that's quite challenging. In some areas it's going better than others. And cancer services, particularly when we talk about radiation oncologists, are very specialised in a very short supply globally. So we've had some interest in Southern, and in fact actually with the resources that we've got in there at the moment, the cancer service is one of the better performing in the country, despite what you may read in the paper, which is excellent. But we do need to ensure that we've got expert SMOs, so senior medical officers on the ground to be able to train, and that's important. And our junior workforce and that pipeline around it is very important. So nationally, when it comes to radiation oncology, there's an additional 5 training positions this year, and there'll be a further 5 next year and the year after, just trying to reverse the shortage that we've got.
Are we getting near the end? I'm not hurrying anyone. Just trying to get a feel for it.
I've got a question, Pete. You said that the National Government made some promises about restoring the funding, and you said that most of the things that have been cut have been reinstated, but one of the things that hasn't has been the additional pedestrian overbridge for public use. I guess, and so the question is that in this particular building, in the outpatient building, is the foundations, is the footprint there to be able to install that pedestrian overbridge?
Yeah, it's a good question. Good question. Did everyone understand it? Let me repeat it. Sorry, Holmesy. In an earlier design of the Dunedin Hospital, the big building and the little building were linked not by one bridge but by two. One of them's been taken out. Do we know whether the sort of foundations for the second bridge were left or whether they got taken out as well?
All right, the answer's marginally more complicated, but hear me. So on the current red bridge, as we call it, which is the clinical bridge, which is to the east, nearest the fire station, and in some pictures or renders you'll see that bridge appears and doesn't appear. So the history behind that is that as that bridge sort of belongs to inpatients, because there's no point in putting it up initially because it'll just be a corridor to nowhere. So inpatients is only the catalyst or the provider, so it becomes part of the inpatient workload. It didn't appear in some of the original renders because of resource consent stepping stones, and it would be inappropriate to show a bridge that wasn't consented for a building that was yet to arrive. So that's the history of it. So on outpatients, we will essentially put our facade or glass line through without the bridge, because it'll be finished early and we don't want sort of a plywood window looking shabby for a few years. So initially we'll clad through and we'll leave behind at the termination points ready to pop the glass back off again when inpatients is ready for it. The foundations per se actually live in the footpath generally. They don't live within our boundaries currently. And there's a few sort of civil engineering reasons for that, but it's been organised with the roading authorities to do that arrangement. So in time, the red bridge will come. The blue bridge, which is really what your question is the same facading detail to pop a window off when we're ready for it, is also retained. So it's not so much a foundation readiness, because that's a roading job, but the building will be ready for the blue bridge.
More or less a yes.
But I gave a little bit more detail.
You did. Right, now are we done? Thank you for coming. Thank you for your interest. It's your hospital. I hope we all enjoy it when we finally get it. Thank you.